To talk a bit more about the COVID situation in France, let's bring in our Doug Herbert. Doug, as expected, Macron announced these tighter restrictions, but no new nationwide lockdown. What are your main takeaways from what the president had to say last night?
Look, Emmanuel Macron is coming to grips with the same reality that not just French, but people across Europe are having to recognize. The COVID virus never went away miraculously during this summer. It was simply lying low and waiting to spring back, and in some cases with a vengeance across this continent. Macron began last March, right? We remember the warlike language, saying that we're at war, repeating it multiple times during his pre-lockdown speech back in March. He hasn't used the same type of belligerent language evoking a war, but what he is basically saying is that it's at a very worrying point in France. And maybe you could bring up a little chart of some of my takeaways there. He basically said, no, it is not out of control. That's where the reassurance part ends, because while it's not out of control, it's a very worrying situation. He admits that France has been reporting regularly over 20,000 new COVID infections daily for just about half of the past week, about 3 days in the past week. And it's been reporting about 120,000 new infections in the past 7 days. That is a very high number by any standard, even relative to its population. What he's trying to do is what a lot of European leaders are eager to avoid, and that is another lockdown, a lockdown which they fear would further wreck economies already devastated by previous lockdowns or limited lockdowns. So what are they trying to do? It's sort of a stopgap thing. Laying down restrictions, turning it back on, letting people roam free again. But even Macron realizes that that's not a long-term strategy. And what he tried to underscore last night is France needs to step up its game when it comes to better testing, better contact tracing, alerting, and better isolating and protecting of infected individuals. And until that's done, you're not really going to get the numbers down from the highs of around 20,000 I was speaking to new cases a day to what he says he would aim for right now, which is about 3,000 new infections a day. So France really in the grip of a second wave, but a second wave that it's still hoping to be able to get under control. And he reiterated that really depends on the extent to which the French this time are willing to heed the advice. And a new poll shows 94% of French are ready to respect these new curfew rules.
Correct. But how are the French feeling about the president himself, about Emmanuel Macron, and how he has been managing this pandemic since the beginning?
Yeah, well, a recent poll, and this was taken a little over a week ago, but the situation was getting pretty dire even back then, about a majority of French, and specifically 6 out of 10 French, do not give him top grades for his handling of this pandemic. They believe he wasn't really up to the challenge, and that is a sentiment that's reflected in a 5-expert commission, an independent commission, but which was actually appointed, named by Emmanuel Macron himself. And they came out with a report in the past week or so, basically saying that the president and his ministers failed to properly anticipate this virus, failed to take the measures that would have been needed in way of testing, in way of protecting people, the types of guidance they issued. A lot of hospitals, feeling in hospitals, and many medical assistants and workers were left in the lurch with inadequate protection. So they've gotten a pretty harsh assessment, evaluation of their handling during the pandemic. Now, Emmanuel Macron does say that lessons were learned in this first wave. And to be fair, the French do give him, by a very slight majority, more credit for his economic handling of the crisis and for the government's what they see as a sort of quick response to protecting social sectors of the economy, especially hospitality, entertainment sectors, businesses that would be seen as vulnerable and which would have had to perhaps lay off many more people if the state hadn't stepped in with a pretty aggressive response covering workers almost entirely for many months. So on the economic and social front, Macron gets better scores in general by the French, not dramatically better, but better. But on the actual health front and in terms of the measures they took to tame the virus early on, the marks are not so good. He's going at it again, Jeannie, and I'll just leave you with the thought that the presidency here is very much aware that this is now the COVID presidency and that his handling of this pandemic, or his perceived handling of it, will very much define his presidency going forward to what he hopes will be his reelection in 2022. But a lot of that will hinge on COVID.
It certainly will. Doug, thanks for that. France 24's Doug Herbert.